Guitar Business Radio is the podcast for the business of guitar, where you'll always get no reviews, no demos, and no idle chatter. From players to CEOs and in between. If you have a professional or business connection to the world of guitar, this show is your window to insight and information you won't get anywhere else. I'm Jeffrey D. Brown, and I approve this message. So let's get to it. From Guitar Business Media, welcome to the 54th episode of GBR, as we take you down an entirely different path with today's special guest. Brian Majeski and his brother Paul are the latest generation to run the business that's been in their family for 90 years and operating continuously for the last 129 years. Of course, I'm talking about the industry magazine, Music Trades. It's a great interview, and Brian will be telling us some things about music trades that I'm quite certain you didn't know, but we'll get to that in just a moment. First, I just want to reiterate something I mentioned last week, and that's the launch of our all-new spin-off podcast, GBR Focus. It's a new kind of podcast based on an old idea. And while Guitar Business Radio is really about people in the business with our in-depth long-form interviews, GBR Focus is about things, like entities and inventions, miraculous concepts, overdue warnings, and other reasons for living. It's a fantastic concept, but one I know you'll recognize right off the bat. Now, here's what I'd like you to do. Advance over to gbrfocus.com. That's gbrfocus.com. And while you're there, grab some popcorn, Junior Mints, and a 64-ounce soda at the snack bar. Make yourself comfortable and listen to the GBR Focus trailer. The preview, the commercial for the real show that premieres sometime after that. It's only 4 minutes and 49 seconds long, and believe me, it's riveting. Now, our first few episodes, they're already in varying stages of production as we speak, and if you're not already on our email list, you can sign up and be the first on your block to be notified. So while you're contemplating the meaning of all that, I'm afraid we're going to have to progress quickly along to something completely different. Well, my guest on GBR today is Brian Majeski. He's the editor of Music Trades magazine, which has been in operation since 1890. That's 129 years, folks. And they've developed a well-deserved reputation for not only covering MI industry news, but they've become a trusted source for a tremendous amount of important business data that so many people depend on. There's a lot to unpack here, which is something I hear people say a lot these days. So let's get to it, as Brian Majeski joins us right here and right now. Hey, Brian. Thanks so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to come on the show with us today, and welcome to GBR.
Hey, well, thanks for giving me an opportunity to tell my story.
Well, I think it's a great story, and otherwise I probably wouldn't have invited you on. But I've known certainly about you and Music Trades, and I'm on your mailing list, so I get stuff all the time, and a lot of very, very good reading there. So let's kind of dig in. And, I always like to add some historical significance to these interviews. And I know there's a lot of history, as we said, with Music Trades. And we'll talk about that in some depth. But first, what I really want to know is something about your early years growing up, and what were some of the things that impacted you the most in kind of getting you to where you are today? How's that for an opener?
Good question. This has been a family business since 1929. My grandfather ran it. My father was involved, and my brother and I, we're partners today, and we do this together. But we grew up in this thing, so we were basically doing part-time jobs here. Soon after we could learn to read and write, my father liked to joke that labor laws didn't apply to family businesses.
I'm sure.
And child labor laws, that is.
Yeah.
And, I went to my first NAMM show when I was 10, and I haven't missed one since.
Is that right?
So I've just been kind of immersed in this business and all my life, so I don't really know anything else.
So it was easy to sort of make the move into the business in a more prominent way, I would imagine.
Yeah, my father really enjoyed it, and he made this look very interesting and intriguing to both my brother and I. We traveled with him when we were in our teens, and we visited all kinds of places. The Gibson Guitar Factory, we met Leo Fender. We just hung out with all kinds of interesting people that he knew. And when the time came to take up full-time employment, the door was open, and it just seemed like the best alternative we had. So we're here.
Yeah.
It was a good choice.
What, in your younger years, was there anything in particular that you kind of look back at and sort of amazed you, or that kind of stuck out as something that, that really grabbed your interest? Was there anything in particular that you think of?
It's not so much a single person or individual or event, but just the totality of all the people we met in this business in just about every segment, and the earnestness and the intelligence and the effort that goes into delivering products to the buying public, and this endless quest to do it better. And we can see that if we look through our back issues, that the dollar value delivered to the buying public has been on an upward march really since we started publishing in 1890.
But did you have a sense of that when you were 12 or 14 years old?
Yes, I did.
Did you really?
I did. I remember my dad took me to the Gibson factory, and Stan Raildell was running this, and we're walking through there, and you could just see how much effort and how much care went into the product, all the thought process that went in from procuring the wood to handling it. And it's just, when you just see this, it's just very impressive. And that's just one example, but we've seen that played out numerous times. And so these are just an industry populated with earnest people really trying to do a good job. Various competence levels. Some are better at it than others, but for the most part, they're really working hard, and a tremendous amount of that intelligence and effort goes into delivering products that the buying public, rightly or not, just takes for granted.
Did you? Was there anything in your schooling at all that you elected to focus on that you thought might be a benefit to you in your career?
Not really. I studied philosophy, thought about, briefly had entertained an academic career. I did some study in Japan for 6 months in the mid-'70s, which at some point kind of helped because that time the Japanese industry was a big factor.
Sure.
And so it was interesting spending time over there, making some friends. And
so it sounds like you were just really interested in getting a good education. But during that time, were you still thinking that, this is what I'm going to do? I'm going to go into the business?
It had a very strong pull.
Yeah.
It really did.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a great experience for me.
Well, I want to talk about the family business, and it's. I think of this, and I think I told you the other day that when we were talking to Chris Martin, he mentioned you several times, and I, of course, had known about you, and knew about music trades, and I was thinking about the parallel there. I mean, it's not quite as long as the 185 years that Martin's been there, but it's a really, really long time and a lot of history. And I was kind of hoping that you would take a little time and kind of, from what you know, which I think is probably a lot, give us a little sense of what that history looks like and some of the milestones and how you might just describe it from your point of view if somebody asks. And of course, I'm asking.
Well, Music Trades was started in 1890 by a guy named John C. Freund who'd come over from England. And it was really sort of the first trade paper devoted exclusively to what he called the music trades. And at that time, it was primarily the piano business, but there was a hefty business involved with Edison's talking machine and other reproducing devices. The musical instrument side, which included all the wind instruments, the orchestral strings, that was just minuscule in comparison to the size of the piano and the reed organ business.
Right.
And previously, there'd been an adjunct. Some of these magazines had included a section in musical instruments. There was a sewing machine gazette that did it, and a dry goods paper that did this. But, our publication launched, and there were a couple of factors that coincided with that. One was second-class mail, which made it possible to deliver this. The other was the development of the linotype, which made it cost-effective to set type. And you also had this developing retail channel that specialized in musical products. So all of that came together. The time was ripe, and John C. Freund started this. And the business, after a rocky few months in 1893, when there was a very dire financial crisis, it got traction pretty quickly. My grandfather went to work there in 1911, and he was sort of an assistant bookkeeper, but John C. Freund had no children and took a liking to my grandfather, and he promoted him, and he became sort of his second in command. And when Freund died, his heirs opted to sell the magazine to a publicly traded magazine conglomerate, and my grandfather was rather disappointed at that because he had made a cash bid. The heirs made a bid. They took a higher value of stock. The publicly traded company went bust in early 1929. My grandfather ended up buying it at auction July 30th of 1929. And
right in the throes of the Depression, right?
Actually, before the Depression.
Okay.
But the industry had already began to suffer because player pianos had been displaced by the radio, which was a big part of the industry. Yeah. But he was a resourceful guy, and he managed to steer this thing through the Depression. And then during World War II, when there was no consumer production, so there was absolutely no musical instruments, actually with the exception of a handful of guitars. But and then my father took over in the late 40s, early 50s, and it's been sort of upward and onward since then.
Well, that's in itself is extraordinary. I'm sure there's a lot more detail, but since we're a show about the guitar business, and we talked a little bit about this the other day, so I want to have you go into it in a little bit more detail. So I want to know about how Music Trade's coverage of guitar evolved over the years, and I think that's a really interesting story. So I wonder if you could go on with that.
We've always viewed our magazine as something like a local newspaper with a geographically dispersed audience. We tell stories and try and report on things that are of interest to anybody who's making and selling musical instruments. And that function has really been paramount since 1890. What my brother and I have brought to this is a quantifiable numeric analysis. We count up how many guitars get sold and how many pianos get sold, and we make estimates of the retail value of sound systems, electronic musical instruments, the whole thing. And we rank retailers and manufacturers by sales volume. And so this has sort of sharpened our analysis in terms of pinpointing trends and actually seeing the scale and just quantifying things as opposed to just subjective analysis. And that's been, our biggest contribution or our addition to this publication's history. And what we've seen, during my career has been this big shift that the largest components of the music products industry or the musical instrument business were pianos and home organs up until somewhere around 1980. And that's when they started trending down and the fretted instrument business became the dominant factor in the musical instrument industry.
Right.
And, that's still true today, more so than ever. And so we've kind of quantified the rise and the increase in the guitar business. And it's been kind of an interesting thing to watch because you're in the throes of it and you're kind of watching this and you're up to it, and only when you pull back and you can look back over a period of time, you just see, how significant this transformation's been.
Well, what is some of? Can you quantify some of that data and give us a sort of a broader picture of what that trends look like? And
yeah, if you were to take a look at the guitar business in, say, 1978, you're talking about 850,000 units shipped. New instruments shipped. And today, we're just tallying this up, and the acoustic and electric guitars will tally about 2.7 million units, plus another 1.5 million ukuleles on top of that.
Yeah, that's kind of exploded.
But what also has happened is the new shipments are no longer the absolute proxy for consumer demand that they once were, and that's because there's this extraordinary volume of readily accessible used product in the market. And you take a look at all the guitar makers, their biggest competition aren't the other guys building new guitars, it's all the stuff they built in the past, because a good guitar lasts longer than just about anything else you can own. I mean, they can last for hundreds of years. And they are in circulation now, and with these online marketplaces like Reverb and eBay, consumers have access to an extraordinary inventory, pictures, descriptions, and they're accustomed to doing this. And so all of a sudden, we think that the 2.7 million new guitars shipped in 2018 are maybe half the market because of all this used stuff that is flying around.
One of the things I'm curious about is if you have a way of sort of understanding the relationship between the growth of the so-called vintage market or used market, whatever you want to call it, and the new market in terms of how it has affected pricing on both sides. Is there any way to look at that?
Pricing, well, one way that we calculate guitar pricing is if you take the Census Department's estimate of median income, and then you take that figure and you divide how many hours at median income it would take to buy a new Stratocaster, a Martin D28, pick the model of your choice. And if you and you take that trend over a 50-year period, it's just gone down. And one of the interesting byproducts of this is that now you have multiple guitar owners. People own lots of guitars. And that's common in a way that, in the 60s, what's a guitar collector? They didn't exist.
Right, that's
right. You had
right.
a guitar. And what's interesting is that it's changed the way guitars are sold. Because if you look at the early sales material, and we have some of this in our archives, of when the Stratocaster came out and the talking points for Fender salesmen were, here's why the Fender Stratocaster is better than a Les Paul. Here are 10 reasons why. And this is what they were telling their retailers to say. You got to say the Strat is better than a Les Paul. And Gibson salespeople had the same kind of talking points. 10 reasons why the Les Paul is a superior instrument to this Stratocaster. And today, in an era where guitarists are likely to own all of these, you don't have manufacturers disparaging other people's products or even making these direct comparisons, because the assumption is that a guy who owns a Fender very likely will own a Les Paul or a Paul Reed Smith or an Ibanez or multiple guitars, and they like them for their own specific character, and a comparison or disparagement is likely to turn the customer off or undermine your credibility.
Well, it sort of seems like the incentive is to promote how the instrument can successfully be added to your array of guitars, or why you should have this one as well, or something along those lines.
The poetry of an instrument. It's a little bit like the wine in the wine business. A California Cabernet is not necessarily better than a French Bordeaux. They're just different, and they're wonderful in their own right, and you want them both. It's just changed the sales from a either or. You want this because it's better than that too. These are all wonderful. It's just changed the dynamic, and we see this in the evolution of sales presentations and sales material.
Yeah, what your coverage of, and I do see the magazine regularly and certainly digitally, and I want to talk separately about some of those topics later, but just a quick question in terms of the, say, percentages of coverage in your magazine, because you're a cover across the entire industry. Is guitar, one would assume, is the majority?
Guitar is the biggest. It's the biggest category.
Yeah.
I've never really, in terms of our editorial coverage, I've never actually broken it down in terms of how much we devote to electronic musical instruments like synthesizers or guitars in terms of lineage or words or images. Mm-hmm. But guitars definitely dominate our coverage. They play a big factor in it.
And it's
because there's just a profusion of manufacturers, and you'd think that so many of the designs have been established. There's a certain conservatism in them where players want products that stay within narrow boundaries, as some manufacturers say, you have to color within the lines, and if you get something that's a little too radical, it's tough to sell. And yet, within this, people keep pushing the envelope with all kinds of subtle refinements.
Yeah, and with so many, we talked about, say, the last 10 years and the sort of explosion of guitar builders, especially a lot of smaller builders around the world, and now being connected by the internet and social media and that sort of thing has...
Actually, looking back, one of the most exciting things that we got the opportunity to cover is what I call sort of the renaissance of the American guitar industry, which I think started somewhere in the early 80s. And if you look at it, the guitar began gaining traction and growing significantly in the 50s with the advent of folk music. And then you had the early rock and roll people like Bill Haley and Buddy Holly, and that took it up another level. And then you had Elvis. But then the Beatles took this thing and it exploded. If you look at our coverage between 1964 and 1968, the biggest problem was just supplying the demand. And back order, and retailers scrambling for product and manufacturers desperately struggling to ramp up production to meet the demand. And during that period of time, I think all the people that I've talked to, that would be Don Randall at Fender and Ted McCarty, who ran Gibson at the time, they explained was, quality definitely suffered a little bit during that time. And then you had this aftermath where there was sort of the Beatle bust in the early 70s, and that coincided with this huge influx of high-quality Japanese products at a very, very low price, a quarter of the price of an American-made guitar. And the American producers, faced with declining volume and high overhead and demanding corporate parents, they really pushed hard to just try and get their cost structure down, and the product quality also suffered. So nobody would say that the mid to late 70s is the pinnacle of American guitar making.
I was there. I remember it.
But that issue, it kind of created an opportunity because you had all these people looking at this saying, why are these guitars from the 50s and the 60s better? Why are they more desirable? And there's a long list of people, Seymour Duncan figuring out how many winds to put on the pickup, and Larry DiMarzio doing the same thing. Paul Reed Smith taking stuff apart. Bob Taylor doing the same thing. Grover Jackson and Wayne Charvel and Tom Anderson, all these guys who just looked at these vintage instruments and said, it's not magic. There's not something mystical in it. Actually, the reason they perform better is because of a lot of attention to detail, use of materials, and they set about to try and recapture some of that quality and actually quantify it in a very precise manner. And their example provided a big spur to Gibson and Fender and Martin to really raise their game as well. And we've just seen this sort of go where they just keep pushing this. And the latest thing that's just interesting is the high-end guitar manufacturers have been making this transition from, an acrylic synthetic glue to a fish glue for the ribs on the top, because they feel that there's more flex and it just enhances the vibration and the sustain of the instrument. And it's just one of those little things. Got to throw in Larry Fishman in there. How do you amplify one of these things so you can plug it in and make it sound good? There's all these people who just converged on this, and their efforts really contributed to what I'd say this growth of the guitar business. And for me, having a ringside seat, watching them, listening to them, hearing them explain their story and all the stuff that they've done to enhance the guitar has really been pretty exciting. And especially in retrospect, you look and say, wow, they really accomplished a lot.
Yeah, there's so much there, and that's such a great way to look at it. Let's shift gears just a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit about the retail side, because I know that you're very well connected to so many parts of the industry, and retail not the least of them. So I guess I want to ask you your assessment. Clearly there's been changes, and the changes continue, and change is constant anyway, so we're not going to avoid that. But I want to kind of get your assessment and where you see things possibly going and what has transformed over the last number of years since we've had this internet boom. And I'd like to kind of just have you shed some light on that for us.
Well, we see the guitar market as kind of bifurcated. It's a little bit like the bicycle market. You have inexpensive bicycles that get sold by Walmart and Dick's Sporting Goods, but people who want something a little better end up gravitating towards a specialty store. Mm-hmm. And as we look at the retail network, there is a large number of these really good specialty guitar merchants. Some of them are online, some of them are brick and mortar. Most of them are, I guess you'd describe them as multi-channel. But the number of SKUs or shopkeeping units, just individual units you can buy in the guitar business, is dizzying. It is staggering. And to have someone who can help you navigate that, who's credible and knowledgeable, really knowledgeable down to the nuts and bolts, that's valuable, and that means something to customers. You don't need thousands of these stores because these are not convenience purchases. It's not like buying toothpaste or razor blades where getting in and out is the primary concern. So you're willing to make the trek because this is an event to do this. But, we see that guitar expertise still having a lot of value. And if we look at the retail landscape, there are a bunch of building blocks that you can create a business that can survive in an internet environment. One of them is obviously a lesson program, repair service, sound installation, rentals for school music programs, and then the final one is a real guitar expert, somebody who just is encyclopedic. And the knowledge there works two ways, because basically if you have that knowledge, you can deal with the used business. Because if you're not encyclopedic and you really don't understand guitars, taking in trades and dealing with used stuff is pretty dangerous.
I would agree with that.
What everybody tells us is that it's easy to buy new stuff. You look at the price list, that's what it costs, and you figure out what you can sell it for, and you make the decision whether it works for you or not. Used stuff is tough to buy because there is no price list, and someone comes in and every transaction is a little different. And so having someone who can look at this instrument, make the assessment, and say maybe it needs work, maybe it's pristine, maybe this is really desirable, maybe it's not that desirable. You need someone who can do that. And people who have that skill, they're rewarded. They do well. Do
you think that, again, it's a changing landscape and, we're not going back anytime soon, that new kinds of retail, say, we'll call them brick and mortars, but say new kinds of stores might emerge that are doing things differently?
The one type of store that we've seen is sort of the brick and mortar online guitar specialist. And these guys, they have a nice showroom where you can come in and see guitars, and they have a lot of inventory to sample. But when they put a guitar online, it's not using the stock manufacturer's pictures. They actually photograph the individual guitar, and they take pictures all over the place. So you can see the grain, you see the serial number, you see the unique qualities of it, and then they'll maybe put an audio clip on there. So when you're looking at a guitar, you're seeing a specific serial number right in front of your eyes, and you can actually assess it. It's not, the manufacturer stock photograph that. And those retailers have actually done very well. People who have adopted that model. It's time consuming and it's labor intensive, but
and I see some of
it has customer appeal.
Yeah, I see some of the bigger online retailers doing something similar to that. There's a kind of a very closely related topic that I wanted to ask you about, and I think there's my sense is a little bit of controversy in it. Not everybody wants to talk about it, but that's the area of manufacturers selling direct. And I'm sure you have some opinions on that and some knowledge. And some people want to talk about it and some people don't. And I think that's in itself is interesting. So what do you have to say?
The real issue in our industry, where manufacturer direct is a bigger deal than guitars, is in software-based products, which are a sizable product category. And that is going to subscription models and downloads and bypassing the retail channel. And so that is more immediate. The issue with selling direct is there is a cost to this.
Sure.
And there's an inventory cost. There's a labor cost in handling individual transactions. There's a follow-up cost in dealing with all the after-sales service from, quirky customers who make unusual one-off demands. And so you need people on staff, and you need training to do that. And when we look at the landscape, some of the manufacturers we talk to, they seem to view selling direct as an opportunity to get a few plus sales at a very high gross profit because they're cutting out the retail market. And I don't think that's going to work well in the long term. You really have to deliver the value to the customer. One of the problems that a manufacturer will face selling direct is maintaining the inventory, because if you look at any of the major brands, they have hundreds, if not thousands, of distinct models when you add all the finished configurations. And customers who are shopping online, and this is not limited to the music industry, they expect that if the product, if they see it on the website, it should be there. You should get it in 2 days,
in a few days.
or 1 day.
Right.
The fact that the picture or it's available on your website indicates that it should be ready to ship. And if you look at the way guitar factories work, they are job shops. They make 50 of this model, and they may not revisit it for another 8 months, or they make 100 of this. So they're short-run shops, and it creates an inventory challenge. And so for a manufacturer to really effectively sell direct, they have to commit to inventory. Now, if they want to do special order stuff, well, maybe there's an opportunity for that. Yeah. I don't see it as a big issue in the guitar business.
I was kind of curious, and I asked Chris Martin this question, and we kind of sidetracked it a little bit, and I did a little sort of research on my own, and it appears that maybe you know better than I do, but my glance at it looks like you can actually go to the Martin factory and buy a guitar, but you can select what dealer you want to attribute it to, or something along those lines. That's an interesting approach.
Yeah, they've modeled that after the German car makers. You go to your dealer and set up an opportunity to go pick the car up in Munich or Stuttgart, depending on which one. You drive it around Europe, they ship it home, and it's the dealer is rewarded for the sale. He's included in the process. And, some manufacturers do a little selling direct, but for the most part, their business involves having retailers stock a lot of product.
Yeah,
they all have inventory requirements. They have model stocking. The prominent brands do. And everyone will tell you that, it's a fight for hooks on the dealer's wall or prominent placement on the website. And, dealers are understandably territorial about their market, and they are not going to look it's human nature not to look as kindly on people you're competing with. That's just a fact. So, manufacturers are all sitting there looking at that, weighing that, maybe we could sell direct, maybe in certain instances it would make some sense, but you have to balance that with what happens if we're not getting the love at the retail level, and instead of having 50 hooks, we have 40 hooks. And
there may be no gain there. It may be a loss,
Well, and also you look at every manufacturer, and they have some products that are in demand that will sell, and retailers feel compelled to stock because they're high demand items. But they will also have products in their line that are more push related, that they need a little help and a nudge on the retail level because they don't have that level of demand.
Yeah, interesting way to look at it. Once again, I love to shift gears, and one of the things that you and I have in common, although you have a lot more years at it, but I spent probably 15 years in the magazine business as a publisher, and love the business. Would still love to be in it today in some way, but it's way different since I've been out of it for about 12 years or so. So I wanted to just ask you a little bit, because the magazine has so much history, and you've gone through this transition, and it's been quite a transition. If you could just give us a little bit of a sense of how the magazine has evolved involved in this internet age and the future of digital, and that sort of proverbial question that keeps coming up is, how much life does print have left in it? So kind of a broad-based question.
We're multi-platform, so we have a digital edition, we have a print edition, we have email newsletters, we have blog posts, we have all kinds of stuff. And really, if we were to say, why we're still in business and why we're still a pretty healthy and thriving enterprise, it's because we have unique content. We tabulate the industry. We have analysis that's based on a numerical assessment of what's going on. And people in and out of the industry find that valuable, and there's nowhere else to get it. Nobody else has done this. This is an industry that's comprised of small, primarily family-owned enterprises. There are half a dozen or so publicly traded companies, but for the most part, there's not a wealth of data available, and we have leveraged relationships, understanding of retail, relationships with retail organizations, and an ability to make sense of trade data compiled by the World Trade Organization. You put all this stuff together, and we have spent an awful lot of time distilling this down into a numerical portrait of the industry, and nobody else has done it. It's very valuable. People around the world think it's pretty useful. And what's interesting is the digital thing has dramatically increased our global footprint.
I would imagine so, sure.
We've always had pretty good representation. In a pre-digital age, we had all the major distributors in Japan and Western Europe got the magazine. Now we have everybody. And when I say everybody, we've got 45,000 people around the world in India, Southeast Asia, Australia, South America, even parts of the Middle East that have the ability to cut a purchase order. And they look to our magazine because this numerical analysis provides some pretty interesting trend analysis that's not available anywhere else.
Well, you have for many years, I've considered music trades to be a very serious source of information, and the data notwithstanding. It's a serious publication, and I have a serious mode, but I've always been a little bit of a sort of a off-center thinker in my work, and so I do appreciate that aspect of what you've done. And look, there's longevity on your side. I mean, it's many years, and you're still going.
It is that. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because really they describe newspaper or media as the first draft of history, and if you go through our back issues, which I've done over the years, you really do get a sense of not just the music industry, but sort of how it fits in the larger culture.
Yeah.
And all these commercial trends. One of the things we find really kind of interesting is that there's a brick and mortar retailers who bemoan the internet and the competition that is, and price pressures and all that stuff that it has brought on. But the comments just almost echo word for word the complaints hurled at the Sears Roebuck catalog at the turn of the 20th century.
Huh.
These guys are just destroying local music stores.
Yeah.
They're a scourge. So some things are obviously different. The products are different. We live in a far more prosperous society, and all these consumer goods are much more readily available. So lower prices means there are a lot more of them being sold.
Of course, lots of commodities.
And the profusion of product available. You want to get a distortion pedal. I remember when there were 2 in the market, and now it's basically an infinite number.
It's crazy.
And everybody comes up with a new one, and God bless them, they find somebody willing to buy this stuff.
Well, and you got sort of the start of the boutique pedal business. I mean, the word boutique has now been applied to just about everything.
Yeah. Well, we liken it to sort of craft beer.
Yes, that's it. Boutique beer. That's what it
they've
is.
just carved up. They have carved up Budweiser and Miller, and you've just had this similar profusion of effects pedals. And what's interesting is there's a whole support network that has evolved to build these things. So you can get a contract manufacturer to etch your circuit board and stuff it. There are these digital chips available from a company called Spin, so you can program your audio path in this. There are companies that sell the boxes. You can get companies that sell all these knobs. And so somebody working by themselves or with maybe an assistant or two can put together a pedal that, from a build quality standpoint, is way better than the early generation Electro-Harmonix or MXR stuff was, by a huge margin.
That's
it looks
true.
better, it's built better, the quality's better, and so kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is. We're at the point of the interview that I like to sort of turn to this perspective a little bit, and I know we've covered a lot of this along the way, so I want to just kind of fine tune it a little bit and ask you to look in sort of the macro view and perspective on the industry, mostly in terms of where do you see opportunities and where do you see the challenges. It's a general question, but it's up to you where you want to go with it.
The opportunities are music is deep-seated in human nature, and people want to make it, and they love it, and it's just interwoven in the fabric of the society. The challenges are there are a lot of people chasing this market. It's very competitive, and finding that efficiency that allows you to deliver a quality product at a better price, or offering some kind of unique, hard-to-duplicate feature that allows you to charge a premium. These are challenges because there's just a lot of smart people in there. And so it is difficult carving out a niche and defining a product in a way that you can build something that's consistently profitable and sustainable.
Yeah.
But the demand is there, and we don't see any ebb and flow in that.
There's not going to be any early demise promoted as it was. I think there was about a year ago or whatever that the guitar was dead.
That was that.
That famous article.
That was just misguided,
Yeah.
and the author of that. I don't want to be too critical, but I think there was a little journalistic malpractice there in terms of approaching something with a preconceived thesis and then discarding all the inconvenience.
I think everybody, I'm sure there's some has been some second thoughts on that going forward. But my final thought or final question really is more personal, and I could just sum that up by saying, what does the future hold for Brian Majeski? You've been at this for a long time, but
good question. I don't know. I wish I had the answer. I'm got my head down, muddling along. I have to say, I've made some wonderful friends in this industry, and it's more than a job for me. I mean, these are
I would think
people that I know and had a lot of shared experiences over the years, and being in contact and just having the proximity to them it's a tremendous benefit. It means a lot to me.
So you wake up in the morning and you look forward to going to work. Am I right?
Yeah, more or less. Every day. You've been in the magazine business, and you know that that there are. They call it work for a reason.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I suspect we'll be seeing the name of Brian Majeski at Music Trades for quite a while, and I think that's a benefit to all of us. And I really want to thank you for taking the time on fairly short notice to come on the show. But it's something, as I told you, I've been thinking about for quite a while. And so I'm really happy that you're able to come on. Thanks so much.
Well, glad to do it, Jeff.
So what did you think of the interview with Brian Majeski? We always want to hear from you, and you can do that easily through the official episode page on our website at guitarbusinessradio.com, or on Facebook and Twitter at Guitar Business, or you can just email us at contact@guitarbusinessradio.com. And of course, if none of that works for you, just call us on our GBR hotline at 888-777-2404. You can do that right now if you like, or later. Operators are sitting around having cocktails and appetizers, so call them before they become uninterested. So, because of my own background in the magazine world for many years, I've been interested in having Brian on the show for quite a while now. I always enjoy talking to colleagues and contemporaries, or maybe it's the other way around, I don't know. But more importantly, he knows a lot about the business side of the business, and that's what we're interested in. And I feel so fortunate to be able to have guests on the show that are diverse and knowledgeable and interesting, but most of all, have a great story to tell. And I really don't know of anyone who's come on the show that hasn't had a terrific story, but the truth is, that's deliberate. That's what I'm looking for. And Brian Majeski really hits the mark. Truthfully, I probably could have asked enough questions to go on for another hour or two because, well, there aren't many people like Brian who have that kind of history to relate to. Did you hear him say he went to his first NAMM show at the age of 10 and hasn't missed one since? Wow. I almost asked him, well, how many shows is that, Brian? But the better host in me decided against that line of questioning. But nonetheless, that's amazing. I bet there are not many people on the planet that can make that statement. Very few indeed, I suspect. So, it's always been my goal to be as creative and original as possible on this show and frankly, most other things that I do as well. For instance, our PR and marketing business, Guitar PR, is quite unconventional in many ways, especially the most forward-facing part of it, our structured media services. We've deconstructed the idea of press releases and recreated another old idea into something new and relevant, and while we're at it, made it affordable. We market it differently, and we sell it like a product, even though it's a service, and full service at that. Nobody does what we do the way we do it for the price we charge. And how can you go wrong with that? So how was that for a segue into a commercial? The only thing I didn't mention, of course, was the website, but that shouldn't be too hard to figure out, right? But seriously, I do like to throw in a plug for what we do every once in a while. It's helpful, but in the long run, it's never as helpful as these words that guide me every day. Stay positive, stay focused on your destination or destinations, but remember, always keep all your options open on how you're going to get there. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again on episode 55. And that's it for this episode of Guitar Business Radio. Thanks for being with us. You can stay tuned and stay in touch at guitarbusinessradio.com.